So if we go back to the 300 and I think it was 309, yeah. So that's both indirect and direct. A lot of people, when you think of forestry, immediately, like they said, they kind of just think of harvesting and they think of that component of the industry. But that's not true. There's so many different sectors in forestry, like silviculture, tree planting, wildfire. Then you move on to the wood products manufacturing side of things, the Home Depots, the consumer goods side of forestry. That part seems to kind of get lost, I think, when people consider what forestry is as a whole. They kind of just get pinpointed into thinking, oh, it's just the harvesting, it's just the milling, and it's just the production of the wood. But it extends far beyond that. Wood and paper products. You see now a lot more buildings are actually being used and built out of wood, and it's sustainable, right? Wood stores carbon. So it's a viable kind of method that we can use in the fight against climate change, is promoting these products and really showcasing that forestry is much larger than just that one forestry and logging. Like if you look at this one here, forestry and logging is just the green. That's it. The bulk of the industry is actually the wood product manufacturing and pulp and paper manufacturing. So those items that we use every day that we take for granted, our paper, our signs, all those things, those are from the forestry industry. The second part to the question, could you repeat that one?
It was, what are some of the things that the forestry professionals like you love about working in the sector that people don't usually know about?
Hmm. Honestly, I think one thing that people don't really realize about forestry is it's such a people industry. And the people that I work with are probably the shining part of each and every day. You know, a lot of people think that you'll go get your tech diploma and then you're just going to wander around the bush by yourself for all day, not talk to anyone, and just be with the birds and the trees. And that's actually not true. It's such a multi-phase industry, and you connect and network with people from all walks of life and such different industries. Like every project that happens in forestry, you have a layout crew that comes in and they design the cup lock. And then you have biologists come in. And then you have hydrologists come in, a geoscientist, a local indigenous leader. And you get the opportunity to learn from all these people and talk to them outside in the forest and gain new perspectives and understand that, you know, our world is quite small and it's such a larger industry. So I would say the people component is something that a lot of people don't expect. And then, of course, as cliche as it is, I work with my dog in the woods every day, and you know we're tromping around, and it's just that really is the highlight of the industry. A lot of people, you know, when I first started out, I'd have people say, "Oh, but you love nature. Like, why are you working in forestry? You're just gonna destroy it." And that couldn't be further from the truth. You know, everyone has people who pursue this type of work are environmental stewards. You know, we go camping on the weekends too. We love being outside. No forester I know is going to sign off on some detrimental project and say that that's okay. You know, we're all out there to protect and properly manage our resource. Great question. I'd say the first part is to be curious, to ask questions and learn, and maybe look beyond the news headlines and the quick and dirty social media posts that, you know, you see a headline, you think, oh, it's just so bad, they're just cutting all the trees down. I really encourage the youth to explore what forestry really is and also how they benefit from it. You know, there's, and just to, you know, SFC, something like what you're all doing right now, this is this is what we need to be doing more of. We need far more avenues for youth to kind of access this information. And forestry often feels like it's stuck in 1970s. Like they'd have no tech background. We're not tech firms, but that's where the demographic is. They're on social media, they're on these platforms. So, I really urge like the creative and the digital minds to find creative ways to punch through that market and really reach that demographic. That's where Timber Connect was born, because we thought, what better way than provide a podcast where anyone can access it at any time, and maybe be framed with a context or a question that they haven't considered before, and pique that curiosity, because as youth you should always be curious, you should always ask questions and really try to educate yourself beyond what mainstream media is trying to tell you. That's a controversial question because, you know, on my podcast, actually, I had the opportunity to speak with Derek Nibor, and he is the president of FPAC, which is the Forest Products Association of Canada. So big name. And he had just got back from Seoul, South Korea, where they were doing the World Forestry Congress tour. And I asked him that exact question. I said, how does Canada stack up on the global scale? And he was shocked with the response because, outside of Canada, we're actually very renowned for a lot of the innovation and the sustainable practices that we implement. There are other countries that are super competitive, like Norway, a lot of those kind of Scandinavian nations. They're quite advanced as well, but we have a huge industry and so much resources to balance here. And Canada stacks up pretty high. I would say an area where we're really lacking is tech. So, more modern equipment maybe out there that's not using as much fossil fuel to harvest the timber. Because when you look at the net atmospheric balance, sure, trees are storing carbon, but we're also emitting carbon through our operations. So how do we cut that back? I'd say places like Norway are a bit ahead of us on that game. But in terms of environmental management, in terms of wildlife preservation and conservation, streams and wetland buffers, we're pretty high up there. Canada is recognized as a leader in national forestry or global forestry, but locally it's got that image problem, and people, and that's what Derek was mentioning. He says it's so difficult for me to come back from Seoul and get praised and hear about all the good work we're doing, and then come back to Canada and run into a protest on my way to work and be told that our industry is, really kind of not doing it for everyone. So I'd say that we're up there, but we still have work we could do, and we could always improve. I'd say one of the things that excites me the most is drones. So LiDAR got introduced, I'd say, in about 2011. And I don't know if everyone's familiar with what LiDAR is, but it's now gotten to the point where we can actually attach these systems to small drones and fly them over our land base and really capture detailed information about our forest canopy, our inventory, wildlife, the understory vegetation. It's one of those things that really kind of excites me. And a shameless plug for Timber Connect, we did just interview a PhD candidate who is developing a framework using LiDAR, and it was a great conversation. But it's definitely one of the most up and coming pieces of tech that I can see. And then I'd say a little bit more even so on the media side of things, like podcasts are becoming available. A little bit more of social media marketing is becoming available. People are really trying to get out there and spread the word. So that's another piece of tech. But honestly, there's so much room for innovation and creativity. Like if you have a creative mind and you think you can apply something to this industry, it's very welcomed. Like change is very welcomed here. So yeah, tech's kind of at the forefront, but I'd say drones would have to be. I want to fly one so bad. I haven't, but it just seems like it's really kind of one of the up and coming pieces. Say the Forest Products Association of Canada kind of realm of people. They've been putting out documentaries now. They've been putting out I think it was called Forestry for the Future, is a documentary that you can find on FPAC's website, and they're really pioneering the way. My hometown of Williams Lake, the First Nation there is also really, really kind of leading the conversation around carbon sequestration and how we can use our forests to be advantageous for our fight against climate change. So I'm really proud to see that coming out of my hometown. Um, but honestly, there's really not that much, and that is kind of why Timber Connect was born. We really realized and noticed a need for that, because every time I went on to social media, I would just see negative comments. Um, I don't want to point fingers at some of the organizations, but there's just a lot of negativity kind of around the industry, and that's where the concept was born. Like, how do we change that narrative, and why is no one else doing it? It is People are starting, and organizations are starting to really put out more material. I also do want to give a shout out to Free to Grow. They are an amazing organization, really, really hyper focused on inclusion and diversity in the industry, which I think is so, so, so important. Um, Forestry always had a little bit of a reputation as a old boys club, and it's just not the case anymore. Like, I was teaching when I started teaching, we have 12 students in our groups, and typically it'd be about 10 guys, 2 women. That would kind of change here and there. The last group I taught in the Lower Mainland, we had 11 females and 1 man. And honestly, it was the best group I've ever had. They were so great and keen and interested and curious. And I was really proud to see that and be a part of kind of that full circle of forestry. Question. So I believe they're probably referring to wildlife potentially, in terms of like pushing pushing the wildlife out of a cut block. But essentially what happens is, you start with a permit for harvesting. And what happens there is you have a crew come in to kind of assess and recce the land base. So essentially what they do is they're building a model of what exists out there, what are we working with, where are the lakes, where are the streams, where's the wildlife, where is everything? And you basically build a map or a model. Once that's happened, you pass that off to the next phase. They come in, they remove the timber. By law, each tree cut has to be replanted by 1 year. So there's no if, ands, or buts about that. You're very regulated. To close your contract, you have to have those trees planted within the ground. I think I misspoke. It might be 2 years, but it's within that time frame. Most will plant the following season. There's a sector of forestry called silviculture. And what silviculture is, it's concerned with the regrowth of the forest post-harvest. And they come in and they do surveys. And they do surveys while planting. So they're checking the planters to make sure that quality is maintained. They're planting the trees in correct places, that the trees will actually grow. And then they come in year after year and they survey that land continuously to check health, to check the status. How are these trees doing? Do we need to provide any treatments? Maybe they're being outcompeted by brush. Maybe we should send someone in to go cut that brush down so the trees can thrive. Maybe we need to go in and replant because the trees that we planted aren't taking. So they'll survey this cycle, probably for the next 5 to 10 years, until the tree, actually it's funny because Free to Grow, the company or the organization or campaign that I was talking about, is actually a term in forestry, and that's what it's called, is Free to Grow. So the contract that you sign with the Crown when you're harvesting the timber, you're held to that contract until you can deem that forest is free growing, which means that without human interaction, we have gotten those trees to a place where we can step back and let nature take its course. The crazy part is that, so I started tree planting. When you plant a tree, I would never work with those trees again in my career. right? Because it takes about anywhere, depends on where you are or the productivity of the site, but it takes anywhere from 60 to 100 years for that tree to reach maturity again for us to harvest. So it's a waiting game, and patience is a virtue in forestry. But yeah, so it can take any of that kind of timeline in there. Difficult. But you know, it's I have two sides to this because again, I am an environmental steward. I do love being outside. I love nature. I'm out there on my days off with my dog. So I see where they're coming from. Like I understand. They're, people who are protesting are they're like their ideas are sound. What they're protesting for, conservation, better management, I'm actually all for that as well. I support that. And I think forestry does a good job at entertaining those conversations. Like we want to have them too. The hard part is when there's people who don't want to have those conversations. They want to stick with the status quo of their opinion and not budge. They don't want to be at the table. They don't want to be a part of actually improving the process and having meaningful conversations with indigenous leaders and other professionals to find out how we can truly make this better. I think that contentious issues and debates and protests are really important for society because that really pushes change. And I'm all for that. But the misinformation drives me crazy. Like with some of the numbers they toss out, I just think to myself, where did you find that? Like how did you, and you can't tell them otherwise because they're very fixed in that belief because we have so much attachment to forests as humans. And especially when you look at indigenous nations, the operational forestry land base overlaps directly with their territory. So I get it, and I want these conversations to happen, but we really do need to get a lot more of a clear understanding of like how much old growth do we have and where are we getting the numbers from this? How much is actually being harvested? Why are we harvesting old growth? What is carbon sequestration? A lot of people don't understand that concept, but basically when you think of a tree, you plant a young seedling, that tree in your backyard there. While it's growing, it's going through the process of photosynthesis. It's capturing carbon. It's taking that carbon and disassociating it and storing it as biomass for growth. Eventually, just like humans, it gets to a point where a tree reaches maturity and we no longer really grow that much, right? At that point, a very old mature forest can become, instead of a carbon sink, they start to become a carbon source because they start to decay. So the concept is, okay, well, if you can cut that tree down, capture that timber, turn it into a 2x4 and build a building out of it, you've now permanently stored that carbon. So it's kind of tricky, but that's a piece that a lot of people miss. But I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done in terms of education before people would truly understand the concept of carbon sequestration. Like there just needs to be kind of a social change in the way that how we view our forests in general. So there is a reason that the coast of British Columbia specifically has a lot of public outcry. And it's because if anyone's ever been to Vancouver, the trees are huge. It's very productive sites here. And probably one of the most sought after trees in terms of harvesting is our Western red cedar and our Douglas fir. So they grow in abundance here. But yeah, that would probably be the most sought after forest. And it's in what's called the coastal Western hemlock Beck zone. So forestry companies definitely like to kind of target these areas of high productivity because when they cut the trees and replant, they're taking that timeline of 60 to 80 years before they go back in, and they're reducing that because the site is so productive, it's going to grow those trees back in a much more timely fashion. But yeah, There's so many. I mean, spruce is my favorite tree. My dog is actually named after spruce. Her name is Picea, which is the Latin genus for spruce. So I also love those forests. They're so rich, and it looks like you're in Jurassic Park when you're walking through them. It's pretty cool. So there's multiple avenues that you can use to get into forestry. Companies like the company I work for, which is Stillwater Consulting, we offer targeted training programs that basically you'll come into our course for 19 weeks and we'll get you all the certifications that you need. So you'll come in, you'll get entry level training from me about species identification, stream management, forest health, all that kind of technical side of things. And then we'll put you through certificates like chainsaw operator, brush saw operator. You'll get first aid. You get a whole swath of certs. So basically, the idea is that you leave our program ready to jump on a crew and start entry level. What you will find as an entry level employee is that if you want to work your way up, schooling is kind of necessary. So a lot of places in, well, I know Nate in Alberta offers this. I don't know about anywhere else, but you can get a tech diploma. So that's 2 years. Actually, let me reframe that. Basically, forestry is very similar to nursing. So in nursing, you'll have an LPN and an RN, right? One's a 4-year, one's a 2-year. Forestry is exactly the same structure. So if you get a 2-year tech diploma, you can then go out and work. You register with your provincial association. You get your RFT status, which is a registered forest technologist. So at that point, you now have a stamp. You can run a consultant firm. You can practice professional forestry. The step above that is the 4-year degree. And in that sense, you're going to become an RPF, which is a registered professional forester. So it's very similar structure with that 2-year, 4-year. There's a lot of overlap between the two. I wouldn't say one is necessarily better than the other. It would really just depend on where you see yourself going in your career. If you want to be upper level, maybe government, making high executive decisions, you'll probably want to pursue an RPF. And if you want to be in the field, making those on the ground decisions, you'd probably want to pursue an RFT. And there's tons of schools that offer this. In BC alone, you have Selkirk College, the College of New Caledonia, University of British Columbia, University of Northern British Columbia, Vancouver Island University, the list goes on. So there's no shortage of educational routes for you to get into forestry if you want. If you just want to dip your toes in it and you want to see if it's something that interests you, I totally recommend looking into programs like Stillwater's, because you get the training, you get the certs. We're government funded, so it's free course for you. And you walk out ready to go with a gear package. You can jump on a forestry crew. We're going to help you network and find a job. And you see if you like it. If you like it, maybe go back to school. If you don't like it, maybe go back to school. So my email is ty@stillwaterconsultingltd.com. I would entertain questions from anyone who wants to kind of better understand the industry. I would recommend listening to our podcasts. I think we're 9 or 10 episodes in. Correction, we're 11 episodes in, and they're great. Like, we're always talking with biologists or some new kind of lens of forestry. So the whole purpose of that podcast is to educate. So if you have questions, I bet there's an answer for you in one of those podcasts. We really grill our guests with pretty targeted questions, and they're great conversations. But if anyone wants to reach me on that email, you can pop it in the chat there, and I would totally entertain questions from anyone for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming out. This was very entertaining and very informative, actually, like just incredibly informative. So thank you so much for taking the time to come and speak with us today. And yeah.
Thank you. I definitely appreciate everything that you're doing at SFC, and it was an honor to come in and share my experience. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you all for joining us today, and have a great Canada Day. and happy long weekend, everyone.